everybody, welcome to Books Up Close. Hope you're doing well. This is another late video, but don't judge me. This is all the books I read in July. I read a little bit less this month and I didn't love a lot of it. Actually, it's funny seeing them now in front of me. I'm like, oh, these didn't hit me in the way that other books this summer have. So I'm going to start with the good ones so we can get some positivity first. First up, and those of you that know me will know this is a very personal choice and an emotional one, so bear with me. This is Adam by Boyega Odebanjo, who this is coming out with Faber. This is a poetry collection from Boyega, a posthumous one, as he sadly died in 2023. He was one of my PhD students. I co-supervised him with my friend and colleague Wayne Holloway-Smith, and this is the kind of outcome of his writing that has been published after his death by Faber, and they've done a really beautiful job. His friends and family have been involved in this. And I had read most of these poems in different forms and contexts, but seeing them together, on paper, between the covers, it's both a really joyous thing and an incredibly sad thing, obviously. So there's a real split between feeling this huge kind of happiness and pride and kind of this real jubilation of seeing these poems in the world and having people read them and sit with them, when I know so much of the thought that's gone behind it, all of the work that he put in, the endless kind of energy that he devoted to his writing and thinking. So there's that part, and then there's also the real kind of heartache of him not being able to see this in the world, because it was one of the key things he wanted is to get this collection out. So yeah, I don't want to say too much about it, otherwise I'll get too emotional, but it's really beautiful. There are some poems in here that even rereading them now, I'm like, good Lord, these are a lot. And yeah, just so kind of haunting in places, and that's partly because of context, but partly because just the writing is so good. The story behind the collection is that in 2001, the torso of a black boy was washed up on the Thames, and the police, in a mode they don't usually do, kind of named him Adam. They usually wouldn't name in that particular way, right? And Adam then becomes a way for Boyega to think about this boy as the beginning, in a kind of retelling of this biblical story, but in a new way, where Adam is the kind of genesis, if you like, of a completely black world, a world not shaped, structured and delimited by whiteness and the violences of whiteness and the histories of colonialism and slavery that underline that. It's therefore this incredibly intimate collection, it's working at the level of the body, the individual, but then it moves to the collective. It thinks about place and time and identity and the kind of long shift of history. It undoes and thinks about gender in the way that Sylvia Wynter did, right? And that Hortense Spiller did. So this Adam isn't this kind of pure masculine beginning of things, but rather a really revised way of being. I don't know how to describe it other than just read the poems. There is so much going on here at the level of form and content and the entire structure. So I'm really happy it's in the world, so I hope everyone goes out to buy that. One of the other books that I loved is The Talented Mr Ripley, that I'd never read before, by Highsmith. Obviously, I'd watched the Netflix version that came out recently with Andrew Scott, and I'd seen the Anthony Minghella version. I haven't yet seen the Alain Delon one where he's playing a version of Ripley. But I was like, I better go to the source material, and this feels like a good summer read, right? And it's a good book to read by a pool and on a beach, as I was in Spain. It's fast-paced, it's funny, it's dark. It has its own tone that's different from both the Minghella and the Netflix version. I forget who directed that one. In that the Netflix one really kind of lingers on the slowness of the story, right? And this downtime and the psychology, which I really loved, and I love the visuals. And the Minghella one is much shinier, brighter, gaudier in a way, in a really fascinating way, and he takes some liberties with the story as well. This is much crisper and tighter. Obviously it's Highsmith, that's what she does, and she's really writing in the detective mode, or the kind of crime novel mode, and it just moves at a clip that I really enjoy, that neither the film nor the TV series quite approximate. The characterization is great, it's fun, you're on the edge of your seat even though you know kind of what's coming. Well, if you've seen either of those versions, you do. So yeah, I highly recommend it, and very, very fun. And now I obviously want to read the other ones too. I've heard less good things about the others, but I still want to kind of see what they have to offer. So yeah, I highly recommend The Talented Mr Ripley if you've never read it. You will fly through it really, really fast, easy to read, but also super compelling and thoughtful as well. Then some books that were like good, okay, depending on the book I'm going to show you. So the first one is this proof I got sent of a book called Isaac by Curtis Garner, and it's from Verve. It comes out in November. And this is a book about a teenager called Isaac who is really kind of finding himself as like a queer kid, like a very supportive mother, very present in his life. He's got this best friend, and the book is him kind of like discovering his sexuality, who he wants to be, how he wants to define himself. And then he meets this older guy called Harrison. We've all met a Harrison, who is both like there and not there. He's both like present, absent. He's loving and like attentive, and then kind of pulls back. It's a very engaging story. It's well written. This is like a debut novel, so I'm not going to say anything about like structure or any of those things. Like, hats off to everyone writing their first novel. There were bits when I maybe felt there was a touch of like overwriting maybe, and I kind of wanted it to pull back slightly, but like the story is super engaging. You will read it really quickly and want to know what happens. And the ending was a shock, actually. There were some things that I was like, oh, I was not expecting this. And they packed a little bit of an emotional punch. As like a queer person, I definitely identified with elements of this character, right? Not entirely. I was not this confident or outward looking as a 17-year-old in any way. So there's something quite interesting about looking back on that period of time from my age now and thinking about like the life of queer kids today and how they're growing up and the world they're growing into with dating apps and all these other things. So yeah, a really interesting book. So if you like, you know, these kind of queer coming of age stories, you'll really get into this when it comes out in November. I then read Dermot Hester's Nothing Ever Just Disappears, 7 Hidden Histories, which is a kind of cultural history of place, I guess you could call it, in that he follows through a set of figures from queer history. So E.M. Forster, James Baldwin, Kevin Killian, Josephine Baker, various people, and kind of tracks their story in relation to the places that they lived and moved and worked and flourished or not. There's a really nice framework, right? Thinking about how place is as saturated with cultural identity as the people in it, right? That it's a kind of mutually informing process. I like that framework. I didn't love the book. Like, there were some really nice parts, there's some really interesting facts I never knew, but because there were so many of these chapters or like these different histories, I always wanted more, right? Like, it gets to a point where it's like, actually, I want to know more about this figure. I don't want to move on to a new person just yet. It almost, maybe a version of this book that I wanted is just like 7 different books, right? One on each of these people. And you can really then delve into the varieties of spaces and locations that they inhabit, especially someone like Baldwin, who we kind of like trot through the various places he lived and ends up in kind of the south of France. When I really wanted to linger in like the Paris moment or even in like the Harlem background, it felt a bit too quick maybe, and therefore less in depth than I would want. And maybe that's because I'm coming at this like as an academic, right? I'm used to a particular kind of mode of nonfiction in that way, and Hester is an academic too, so he's now writing this for kind of like a public trade audience. So yeah, there's something about that I thought I wanted to linger more on some of these stories, but generally interesting, like a good look at some figures that you might not know about. The other book that I was unsure about is this one's called Queer Footprints by Dan Glass, and we read it in work as part of the LGBT staff network that I used to co-chair. I've just given up that role, not that you need to know that, but anyway. And we have a reading group, and this was the book for this year. Last year we read Sean Faye's Transgender issue. And this we kind of read a chapter per month, and that was good. We kind of like moved through it. And this book is really, it takes London in these different segments, and they're kind of little walks that you do around these areas, and he tells you the history of the place. So it's kind of like a walking tour, but on paper. So he gives you a little map, like this one's Piccadilly, this one's King's Cross, And then here are some stops on the journey with people, things you might want to know about. Generally, I like this approach. However, and this came through in our discussions too in the book club, was that you almost wanted to take it out into the street, right? You wanted to be there. You wanted to see more of the things that he's describing. And one thing that I really wanted more of, I think, was more of a sense of a through line of the particular place. Like we're jumping from this to this to this to this to this. And the kind of cohesion underneath it was, for me, lacking in that I'm like, wait, well, who is that person? I want to go back to that person. I want to find out what happened next. Where did they move to? So almost like either have like one figure that you can follow through and let them kind of tell the story of the place, or kind of bring it alive in a different way. Like I almost wanted this as a podcast, not a book, right? I want to plug my headphones in and walk around London listening to him talk, because he's so knowledgeable and he has so much history here that he's telling us, and that's like amazing to me. So much stuff I didn't know about, but I almost want that as we go along. Or I want more descriptions of the place that we're seeing, right? Like I want him to say, like, at the time of writing, if you look to the left, this building used to be here, but now it's like a block of ugly flats with a Sainsbury's underneath. But instead it's like, here's number 72. So we went to find some of these things. It was like, oh, well, is it that spot or is it that spot? And there was something a little bit, maybe the form wasn't quite right for this particular mode of writing, but generally there was loads of stuff in there that I found fascinating. So that's always a win. The two books I did not like this month, like at all. Whereas those were kind of middling, or, there were strengths and weaknesses. These two, This is Battle of a Lake by Adam Mars Jones. I like Mars Jones's writing. I find him an interesting writer. I really loved Box Hill, the other Fitzcarraldo book that came out. I've got some of his other, this Cedilla is there. I think he's a great writer. This feels like some kind of marginalia that he pulled out of a drawer that he wrote a long time ago and was like, Fitzcarraldo, please publish it. It does not, I don't know, it's a very light novella at like under 100 pages. And light as in, I don't really understand what the point of it was or what we got by the end of it. It's about this guy called Barry Ashton, and in the 90s he goes to Kosovo as a civil engineer, and it's really a kind of monologue from his point of view about going to this place and being in this kind of war-torn like moment in time. But it's not really about politics, it's more about him and this kind of like this voice that Mars Jones is kind of conjuring up, which does feel real, but also feels a little bit hammy, feels a little bit like I'm trying to do Middle England white man voice, which is odd given Mars Jones's, I don't know, interest in voice in all the other books that he writes. Like he really inhabits character in a very particular way. This just felt very throwaway. I don't know, I did not really like it at all. There was a couple of funny lines, but generally I was not impressed and don't understand why it's in the world. But anyway, that's my very mean version of that review. But let me know below if you feel differently, if you liked it. There's like one endorsement from Lee Child. I'm like, okay, no shade to Lee Child, but a little bit of shade. The book that I was really sad that I didn't like, this actually made me sad, is Private Rights by Julia Armfield. If you've seen videos previous to this, you will know that I loved Our Wives Under the Sea. Loved. I was really sad that I didn't buy it when it first came out. So I was like, right, her next book I'm buying immediately. And this isn't signed, etc., etc. I did not get on with this book at all. It's set in this city where it's raining non-stop. It's kind of like semi-future, right? It's not like full-on dystopia future, but it's like climate change future that's near. But also the rain is there largely for mood, I feel, rather than anything kind of political or ecological or interesting at level of like, what does the earth become? I didn't find much of that in there. And it's about these three sisters whose their father dies, and basically they're just like, how do they live in this world without him, in a kind of like, what do we do with the house? What do we do with the money? How do we relate to one another, given that we haven't spoken for all this time? And it cuts between their three voices throughout, and then it cuts to some other people near them that also felt weird. But these constant like flitting back between the three, there were certain moments where I was like, if I didn't look at the top of the page, I wouldn't know who was speaking. The voices kind of blended a bit, but beyond that, I just didn't find it very interesting. Like nothing really happens in this book much until like the very end, and even then I was like, it didn't fill me with joy or interest. The writing was fine, but Our Wives Under the Sea is beautifully written, intelligently written. Like there's so much going on formally and at like the level of the sentence, whereas this felt kind of leaden. I read it really slowly. I couldn't get through it. I was reading a couple pages at a time and getting bored. I don't know, this was not for me, and I'm really sad about that because I think she is fantastic and I will read things that she writes in the future for sure, but like this is not the one for me. However, I know that some of you out there are going to have very strong opinions about this and think differently, so please do write in the comments about that. So yeah, tell me what you think about these books if you've read them. Please tell me about the other things that you read last month. I'd love to hear that. And as ever, please like the video, please subscribe if you haven't already, ring the bell for notifications because then it tells you when you get a new video, tell your friends about it, share it. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, so like if we can get to 1,000, that's a pretty good result for this guy sitting in his bedroom around all the plants and books. So please do tell your friends to subscribe, and in the comments below, tell me all of the things you're reading, all the things you think, and how wrong my opinions are, because I like having a debate. So yeah, look after yourselves, keep reading, and stay well.